drifting noiselessly through them on his repulsor field into the slot designated for his ship. Ice that had formed across the Y-wing's skin cracked and fell away as he pushed open the canopy. Dak slid by, rotated slightly, and set his X-wing down in the open slot alongside Wedge's shredded bird. As the two pilots powered down all systems, members of the flight crew that were still on duty moved quickly beneath both ships. They scraped the ice away from the metal skin where it covered power and fuel ports, and connected the necessary feed lines. One of the deckhands moved out from beneath the Y-wing, secured a ladder to the side of the ship just beneath the cockpit, then turned and gave a nod and thumbs up to a tech inside the control room along one side of the hangar. Moments later, as Solo descended the ladder, the massive outer shield doors lurched with the sound of metal scraping on metal as they began to slowly creep closed. He unzipped the front of his orange flight suit as his eyes moved to Dak's ship where Torrin Farr was waiting for the young pilot to climb down to her. His eyes darted to Wedge's ship, and then to the empty slot where Luke's should have been. The Corellian smuggler pulled his arms free of the flight suit, folded it down, and tied the sleeves around his waist, half wishing the princess had been waiting for him. He still wasn't sure exactly how he had gotten mixed up with the rebellion, but at least no bounty hunters had caught up to him yet. The time would come when he could no longer wait, and he'd have to settle things with Jabba properly. Princess or not. He shot a sideways glance to the crew member working on his ship. "Where is Lu, Commander Skywalker's fighter?" The tech continued screwing shut a small control panel on the underside of the engine, answering Solo without looking. The word that trickled down to us from General Rieken was not to expect him. Rieken Han sharply turned and caught sight of Dak and Torrin walking away together. Talking quietly, he watched the pair as they disappeared into a dark hallway on the far side of the hangar. Pushing thoughts of Leia to the back of his mind, he hastily exited, heading down the narrow winding ice corridor that led to the command center. As he disappeared from sight, high up on the opposing cavern wall there was movement in one of the small control rooms. A figure moved out of the shadows and stepped toward the transparisteel. Leia Organa watched Captain Solo through her own reflection. When he could no longer be seen, she dropped her eyes and leaned her head against the pane, rolling uneasy thoughts over in her mind. Abruptly, her eyes flicked up and she stepped back, disappearing once again into the shadows. Zu was the last one of the small archaeological team in, and she closed the door to the small bunk room. The evening winds were kicking up, and a spray of sand had blown in across the floor. She walked past her friends to her trunk, stripping off her jacket and shirt. Ashki stowed some of the heavier gear away as Dagan paced back and forth, his thoughts boiling over into words. "What the hell were you thinking, telling Imperial troops we'd help them?" Eric slid the sun visor back off his eyes and chimed in from where he reclined in his bunk. "Yeah, what made you think you could speak for all of us?" Even Murren was frustrated with her teammate. "Come on, Alina, you need to think, girl. I don't like the idea of getting involved with them." Lena looked up from the artifact she was cataloging, shot a harsh glare at Murren, and addressed the room in general. "You guys. I don't like it any more than you do, but the one thing that flashed through my head while they were talking in there was that they have resources we would never have access to. Helping them helps us. If we find the graveyard together, it's a huge coup for our team, and they find whatever it is they re-after." Ashki leaned against the wall. "Do you even know what it is they re-after?" Lena rolled her eyes. "Does it really matter?" Zu pulled a shirt on and sat down on her bunk. "Yeah, it could matter a lot. Looking for the graveyard on our own is one thing. Dragging Imperial troops across the sands looking for it is another." "Imperial troops, Lena? Are you crazy? Whatever it is they researching for could be really dangerous." Bem, who had been quietly standing in the shadows of the corner listening, interjected. "You know, it's not what any of us would ideally want, but Lena's right. This does help us." A frustrated Dagan threw his goggles across the room to his bunk. "Come on, Bem. You know we don't need any extra attention, especially from the local law enforcement." Bem shifted his stance. "The rest of us aren't necessarily squeaky clean. I know, but I think what you mean to say is that you don't need the extra attention." Dagan's eyes narrowed a bit as he stared across the room at Bem. "That's no secret." Everyone knows why I wanted this location. Bem stood a bit taller, slipping his own goggles into a baggy pocket on his thigh and turning to face Dagon. That may be, but you re the only one on the team that's hanging out in the outer rim because things got too hot at home. Dagon's eyes darted from face to face around the dim room. I've got news for you, all of you are hanging out with me. We all agreed this was a great hiding place for me to lay low where we could also get some work done. Nobody entertained the idea of partnering with Imperial troops until now. He turned his head, and directed his glare toward Lena. It was at that moment that the door burst open and Doc Shirt hurried through, sand blowing and wind howling in the darkness behind him. The old man closed the door quickly and turned, glancing around the room at the troubled faces. Ah, yes. I thought there might be a bit of unrest in here. He walked toward the center of the room and came to stop between Bem and Dagon, turning to look at the latter. Son, I wouldn't let you do this if I thought there was a problem. I promised my sister that you and your friends would be safe here. Dagon turned away, pointing at Lena. That's great, but she's all but delivered me to the Empire. Doc looked around the room, over his glasses, as he spoke. I can tell you something is up. These troops aren't following a normal Imperial protocol. If they had been, they never sought my help for their comrade lying in that bed inside. Under proper protocol, the circumstances under which I came to be needed would have surely meant Holder's evacuation from this place for debriefing at least. At the very least. The doc lifted the glasses from the bridge of his nose as he rubbed the skin where they had been resting. No, I believe these troops are somehow operating outside the realm of the Empire, and have very little, if any, interest in you. With that said, Lena threw the barn door wide open when she volunteered to help them. They'll be back in a few days geared up and ready to go. He replaced his glasses, looking through them at Dagon. Don't make more of this than it is. In this case, any fight you have with them will be one you brought on you. The best thing you can do now, my boy, is get some rest, and help them. Chapter 32 Intuition. Sand was held out by the magnetic shield as the overhead bay doors drew together, sealing out the dark sky and wailing winds. Tupolev was waiting for us, and as our speeder settled to its repulsor field hover cushion, he popped open a small port in the hull, securing the charging cables. ETZ cut power and those of us that had been riding in the exposed rear portion of the transport pulled off helmets and shook sand from beneath our armor plates in the still, dank air of the bay. Tupolev hollered back to us as he returned to his work in the adjacent cash supply room. How's Holder? Dan's pulled off his gloves and hand armor, stuffing them inside his helmet, looking around at the rest of us. Is it just me, or was that wind actually a little bit cold, you turning into an old woman? Dan's, laughed Blade. I laughed a bit too as I pulled off my gloves and watched for a reaction. Felth jumped in before Dan's could respond. No, he's right. Some of the locals on the street the other day were talking about getting the harvest in before winter hit. It must almost be here. What do they grow here anyway? This place is one big sand pit, said ETZ, jumping down off the tailboard. Felth began explaining to them about hydroponic crops as I looked across to Dan's. I don't know about you, but I could stand some cooler weather. He nodded his silent agreement. In the cash room, Tupolev sat down next to 4120 and went back to cataloging the holo cards. I guess nobody heard me. 4120 stood up as Tupolev returned to their desk in the main cash storage room. I heard you. He walked past me to Rogue as he rewrapped the synth skin at the wrist of his cybernetic hand. He repeated Topolev's question. How's Holder? Rogue, preoccupied in semi-deep thought, replied rather mechanically. Recovering, he hesitated a second, staring off into space. Then turned to 4120. But we have a bigger issue. He looked up, locking eyes with 4120. What do you know about the death ritual of the elderly, indigenous Bantha? 4120 looked a bit puzzled at this random and bizarre question, and was at a loss for a reply. We were all listening now. Exactly, said Rogue, not one of us knows anything about it. So, we're going to need the insight and guidance of a local in addition to the scientific approach of that group of kids on the archaeological team. They not from here either. They from Balmora, archaeological team. Asked 4120. It's a long story. I'll explain, but we need all troops recalled from their patrols and duties. Based on the players already looking for this thing. There's a good reason it was hidden, and probably an even bigger reason to find it, and find it first. We're going to need everyone's help. Call them back to base, and get Gurinden in here. I need to put our snitch to work. 4120 nodded. Right away, Rogue pulled Blade aside. You need to have a conversation with your shadow. We don't need any friendly fire accidents. Blade nodded. Felth watched 4120 as he headed for the upper-level comm center. He could DNT help, but wonder who else Gurinden might already be helping. *****. The still quiet of the darkened med lab was broken only by the occasional whine or flutter of a machine or droid. Holder lay in his bed thinking. Caird was here. Now on this planet again, and while it was likely that he didn't even remember about the tracker in his head, for Holder, the elapsed 20 years since the implant was fired into the back of his head only seemed like days. He stared at the ceiling, with half-memories still flashing and falling into place in his head, keeping sleep just out of reach. He gave up trying to get rest and instead, slid a hand under his pillow, retrieving a sheathed knife. As he turned off the bedside monitors, he ripped off their leads and pulled out his IV lines. Rolling to a sitting position on the edge of the bunk, he allowed himself a moment to adjust to being upright. He stood up, feeling the cool stone floor under his bare feet and the ID tags around his neck sliding back and forth across his chest as he walked silently toward the fresher. Once inside, he carefully closed and locked the door. A lone luminary winked on as the door closed, its intense light streaming down from just above a wall-mounted mirror. Silently, he stepped in front of it and locked eyes with his reflection. He hadn't aged at all, but felt incredibly lost. He didn't really belong in this time, and yet he no longer belonged in the past either. 20 years gone in a flash. He closed his eyes and raised his left arm to his head, running the tip of his index finger slowly back across his scalp, over the top and toward the base of his skull. He was almost to the soft tissue of the neck when he felt the slight bulge beneath the skin, sitting up just above the bone. His eyes opened slightly as he slid his fingertip back and forth several times across the bump to ensure it was the right spot. Once convinced it was, he held his fingertip on it as he slid the knife from the sheath with his right hand. Carefully, and with a firm grip, he raised it to his head. The blade slowly pushed through his hair until the sharp, pointed tip came to rest on the bump as he saw the scene in his mind's eye. Sliding his left finger out of the way, he firmly pressed the blade into his skin just below the knot. He slid it slightly so the blade sliced through the taut flesh, which split open under the sharp edge and parted cleanly. Blood instantly welled up in the crude incision and began to flow freely and in great abundance. With the sharp tip of the blade he probed the bloody opening, scraping through the tissue and bone until it found the edge of the small metallic tracking implant. Sliding his left hand around to brace his forehead, he forced the tip of the knife between the small, tubular implant and the bone of his skull and began carefully prying it out with short jerks of the blade. His hand glistened with blood now as he worked, dripping from it down his back in a steady, near constant flow. Finally he felt the tiny cylinder dislodge from the bone. Carefully, he pulled the knife away, bringing it around under the lamp for a look. On the bloody blade sat a narrow cylinder about 2 centimeters long. He rolled it slowly with a bloody fingertip. It was still intact and still transmitting. Perfect, *****. It was nearly morning when Chewbacca rolled out of his modified crew bunk aboard the Millennium Falcon and noted that Solo's bunk had not been slept in. The gentle giant stepped out into the main walkway that encircled the ship. As he stepped onto the smooth deck panels, he raised the strap of his bandolier with attached satchel over his head and situated it properly on his shoulder. Powerful Wookiee hands pushed one of the thick metallic erg clips back into its secure, centered position in the leather bandolier as he took a quick look into the cockpit. Solo was not there either. He gathered up the tool kit and welding set he had left on the gaming bench and headed for the main boarding ramp. The segmented, circular hatch rotated up into the ship, revealing the ramp, as the Wook stepped out onto its frigid, inclined surface. Once out, he closed the hatch, sealing in any heat to be found inside the Falcon. It was very early and activity was sparse within the hangar. A few technicians worked on repairs to Wedge's fighter and the ice-cutting crew was assembled in a meeting huddle discussing the layout of the lower levels. Everyone wore thermal gear. Even in the relative protection afforded within their ice base, temperatures were still cold enough to cause damage if you weren't properly insulated. Being a Wookiee, he didn't have to worry about such things. A young rebel ran past with an armful of tauntaun harnesses and waved to the hairy Wookiee, "Good morning, Chewbacca." Chewie woofed a pleasant grunted reply as the young woman continued running toward the corral. If Solo wasn't around, this might be the perfect time to work on that faulty central landing claw. As he stepped off the ramp and crouched to move beneath the ship, his eyes peered under toward the claw, only to see Solo, in his parka with the hood up, sitting atop a supply crate with his head resting against the extender hydraulics of the claw, fast asleep. A woof of frustration escaped the Wookiee's lips as he turned away. Quickly deciding instead to work on upgrading the ancient cooling lines that snaked across the upper hull. Only moments later a klaxon screeched once, and the shield doors began to retract, opening up to another Hoth morning. The noise awakened Solo, who rolled his head to watch the doors open. The morning sky that lay beyond didn't look any different than the dark, stormy sky he had flown through returning to base the night before. Winds whistled and groaned, blowing snow and fog inside the huge cavern. A blast of the cold air streamed through the hangar and across his exposed neck. Shivering a bit, he secured his parka up to just beneath his chin and pulled the furry hood nearly closed across his face. Mercifully, the haunting images of the nightmare he'd been having of his childhood on the streets of Corellia were fading rapidly as he began to fully awaken. Like shadows hiding from approaching light, they fell away from him. As they did, a new set of nightmarish thoughts slipped in to take their place, thoughts of Jabba the Hutt and how he must be hunting him over dumped cargo. It was something that needed to be taken care of, and soon. His reward money would more than cover the payoff and Fett was temporarily out of the picture until he could have the outrigger on Slave Eye remounted and repaired. His eyes darted to the edge of the hangar as a small group entered. Mon Mothma and Leia, flanked by Alia and Yane, made their way slowly across the hangar, looking at the ships and discussing various plans and strategies. The base was still rough, but slowly beginning to come together. He decided to wait until the recon flights were completed and some sort of perimeter defense system was in place. He didn't want to leave Leia behind until at least that level of protection was up and running. Leia. Thoughts of her raised a whole other set of issues. What about Bria? He had just learned of her death. Had she meant nothing to him? And what about Jenny back on Tatooine and all the others strewn across the galaxy? Was he ready to give them up for her? His eyes moved to the two techs working on Wedge's ship and the empty space beside it. Why would Luke just disappear like that without any warning? The kid definitely had skills, but he also had a knack for needing a safety net. With Kenobi gone, he somehow felt compelled to step up and provide the backup as he had in the Battle of Yavin. Did he feel some kind of obligation to help this kid? His thoughts drifted away to another kid in another time, one whose face had haunted him in the murk of his dreams mere moments ago. He had been one of many street kids that night, out scavenging for food. All were too cocky for their own good, all were that way to hide the bottomless fear that threatened to consume them. On that particular night he found himself stuck watching out for that younger kid. What was his name? The shifting images of years long blurred began to coalesce, slowly revealing unpleasant and untidy memories of that ink-black night in the forgotten alleys of Corellia. Memories of that older gang member with the drawn blaster, accusations about them being in the wrong sector. Han was just a boy, but he had tried to be the honorable man. He had a small makeshift blaster, cobbled together from spare parts found in the scrap heaps near the shipyard. As terrified as he had been, with the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end, he kept it holstered on his hip. He was just a street kid, but he still understood the concept of honor. He never revealed his fear, and he promised himself he wouldn't kill on a hunch or a gut feeling. How utterly wrong that Nave little boy had been. It was here that the memory remained fuzzy. Time had seemed to slow that night in the alley. The older kid drew on them, followed by a flash from both the muzzle and rear of his gun. It discharged a bolt, but the energy coupler in the discharge chamber had exploded in the process, temporarily blinding the boy holding it. The smell of ozone rushed over him as he covered his eyes reflexively. As he did so, the youngster in his care crumpled to the street, having been hit at close range. In the confusion following, Han ran, as fast as he could, away into the night, the sound of his heartbeat slamming against his eardrums. He hadn't stopped running until he saw that small, dark space under the naval loading dock and scrambled inside. Ever since that night, whenever those neck hairs stood on end from a hunch, that life-or-death, knotted hunch in his gut, he took care of himself and those with him. He didn't hesitate or think. He shot first, and worried about the details and the mess later. ****. The small belt hook ring on the lightsaber trembled, but would not rise. The weapon rested alongside Luke's holocron atop a small bench. Luke sat on Kenobi's bed, focusing intently on the lightsaber. His arm was extended toward the hilt, willing it into this hand. Obi-Wan's voice spoke again from the holocron. Feel the force push and pull like a great wind or the absence of air. Like water washing in and away from the shore. Feel the object's energy and merge it to your own. Become one with it. Still the belt hook merely trembled. Luke relaxed his arm. He was exhausted. Master Kenobi spoke again. Do not think of the Force as a tool to be wielded. Think of it as an extension of your own energy, extending and becoming the tool. It will obey your commands just as your arm or your hand would because it is part of you, and you are part of it. Luke took a breath and raised his hand again, relaxing this time and visualizing what he saw in Kenobi's instruction. He imagined his own reach extending out to the hilt. The belt loop trembled again, a bit more agitated this time. He relaxed further, breathing evenly, envisioning his fingertip raising the loop. Across the room, the tiny ring snapped up to face him just as R2 rolled whistling through the doorway. His concentration broke, and the ring dropped. He exhaled, clearly frustrated. Yes R2, we're leaving soon. As R2 rotated to leave, one of his outer feet struck the base of the bench. Both the holocron and the lightsaber were jarred and fell. Luke lunged forward, making the split-second decision to grab the holocron, allowing the saber hilt to fall to the stone floor with a loud clattering. R2, be careful. He put the holocron on the bed and knelt down to pick up his lightsaber. When he picked it up, several small pieces of clear glass fell to the floor. He rolled it over to see that the ancient glass sensor eye had shattered. Shielding his eyes and holding the hilt as far away from his body as he could, he pressed the activation button. Instead of the normal, meter-long energy shaft, a small needle-thin shaft of barely 12 centimeters appeared. Sparks popped and fell from inside the shattered lens as the blade suddenly stretched out to full length. Just as quickly back to the short length, and began cycling between the two length settings. Disgusted, Luke switched it off as he shot R2 a look. The little droid rotated his dome away, avoiding eye contact. Great. The length adjustment is shot. Now what am I going to do? You broke it R2. Suddenly, above the holocron, the image of Kenobi flickered and disappeared, replaced with a display of schematics, lightsaber schematics. Luke leaned in close, studying them as Kenobi's voice whispered. You will need the tools and parts from my home and the cave, and then, you will need to take them to one final place. Find those pieces and I will guide you the rest of the way. The calm of the empty street was broken as ETZ. Dans and Blade stepped out of the barracks into the still morning air. Though ambient sunlight now filled the sky, the gleaming twin suns had not yet arisen beyond the horizon. As the door slid shut behind them, a cloaked shape walking their way hastily slipped into the shadows of an alleyway further down the street. ETZ and Dan slipped on their helmets and set off for the morning patrol loop of the spaceport, having missed the figure's quick retreat into the darkness. Blade stood in his black flight suit, watching as they walked away. Then he turned sharply, heading off in the opposite direction, making his way toward the center of town. He was preoccupied, having promised Rogue he would speak to the Shadow, the incredibly attractive Shadow woman that waited at the Dowager Queen. For the upcoming mission, he would need her to stay behind and not trail him, for her own safety. The search for the lost security recordings could be very dangerous, and he needed to be sure that anyone tracking his group was a target, not a friend. He shook his head. He didn't even know her name. Holder peered from beneath the deep cloak as ETZ and Dans disappeared onto an adjacent street. He watched silently, deep in thought, as Blade moved further away. Should he follow him, or the other two? He looked down to the small cylindrical transmitter in his palm. And then back in the direction the others had taken. Having made his decision, and when he felt comfortable with the distance between them, he pulled the thick cloak in closer around his face and cautiously stepped out into the empty street to follow Blade. The vivid people and situations that fleshed out my dreams began to evaporate into darkness as I mentally ascended toward consciousness. In those last few moments of sleep, I could hear the sounds of mourning in the barracks before my eyes ever opened. When my brain was fully functioning at a level that told me what I was hearing was real, my eyelids slowly parted, letting reality in. The still dim room was fairly out of focus, so I blinked again. This time I opened my eyes to crisp detail. Topoliv, 1265 and Falker were carrying supplies from the front office through to the storeroom in the back. 4120 was sitting on the bunk adjacent to mine. He had the small metal case containing his cybernetic replacement hands open, and was unwrapping the synth skin at his wrist. Finally decided to join us, A-Deck, my eyes fell shut again and I rolled onto my back, feeling the bones in my neck crack as they realigned. I exhaled slightly. Yeah, and lucky me, the first thing I see is your sorry ass. We both grinned without seeing the other do so, and he continued. You know, you snore like a dying bantha. He shot a look my way as the artificial skin came loose from his arm, revealing the implanted metallic stump and the attached modular hand. He looked back to the gleaming joint as he moved the hand around. Rogue and Felth walked past discussing supply needs for our search party. I was still grinning a little as I lay a forearm across my eyes. Well, I guess that's better than taking after you, looking and smelling like the other end. Again we both grinned. I moved my arm off my eyes and sat up. What's wrong with the hand? He scratched at his real skin where it disappeared beneath the stump cap. It was bright red and looked swollen. It's been irritated for a week or so now, it itches something fierce. It's giving me a banging headache and the synth skin one stay attached. I leaned closer for a better look. It looks like it might be infected. You should have the doc look at it before we head out. We may be gone a while. You don't want that thing getting any worse. He attached the sticky end flap of a new roll of synth skin to the back of the cyber hand and began wrapping the joint. If I have time to. I will. I looked around, making sure the others had emptied from the room before turning back to him. Do you get a weird vibe from Felth, or is it just me? He kept rapping. What do you mean? I shook my head. I don't know. Something just seems off about him. I can't put my finger on it specifically, but there's something about him. Things I've seen him do or not do, messages he has sent over the holonet. Maybe just keep an eye on him. He looked over to me as he kept rapping and nodded slightly. Yeah, sure. I nodded back as Felth and Rogue walked hurriedly through again, heading for the rear storeroom. We both silently followed him with our eyes. The elusive shadow of Gurinden slunk almost invisibly through the streets. He knew where to find the pack EAPs needed for the journey, and was running through a mental list of people who could possibly lead the troops and scientists on their search as he walked. There were several crusty old scrap dealers he knew that had crisscrossed the Dune Sea in search of salvageable parts. On any given night, after a few drinks, they spun elaborate tales of an immense boneyard out in the sea. No one had ever taken the drunken fools seriously, until now. As he was nearly to the first of the parts shops, another person suddenly came to mind with a flash. He stopped short in his tracks, his mind reeling. It baffled him why he hadn't thought of the Sandman of Tatooine sooner. Delighted with the recollection, he disappeared into the shop to interview the first of the parts men on his list. His questions would reveal if they were promising, and a good fit for the team, or merely a drunken cantina storyteller. Doc Shirt held a hand up before his face, deflecting the fine sand spray thrown up from the departing speeder. He watched it accelerate away across the flats as his Rhodian assistant headed for home. Holder's bed was empty and he was gone, as was the swoop bike that had been chained up out back. The aging doctor sighed. He'd have to call Rogue and let him know the commando was missing. A slight wind carried on it the distant wailing of womp rats as Dagon approached him from behind. Uncle, it's time. Shirt looked from the horizon down to his feet. The clinic is locked up. Are all the supplies ready? Everything's ready. All supplies are packed and on the repulsor sled. It's nearly midday and the crew is irritated enough about having to go to the troops instead of them coming here.